Hello, and welcome to another day in my life. Okay, so let's get started doing some painting. So that's where I left off from yesterday, and today, this morning I continued adding in detail in the background, painting some wild roses and different kinds of grass and greenery. Just adding lots of detail and texture and variety to the greenery, and some of it is actually going to get covered up, but that's totally fine. That's what, for me, creates the illusion of a three-dimensional space. So here you can see I started painting some more branches. I wasn't happy with how clean the forest was looking. Forests tend to be a little bit more chaotic, so I wanted to add some more variety and at least one more layer of trees. And I don't know what kind of trees these are. They are totally imaginary. But I was having visions of this bark from my childhood, growing up in Newfoundland. I suppose it was just birch bark, really, but it had a reddish tinge to it. So it makes me think that it wasn't birch, but maybe birch can be red. Or poplar, I don't know. I'm not very good with tree names. But because this particular tree is much closer, I did have to get a lot more detailed. So even though these are fairly small branches, I did put a lot of detail into them, and I tried to add a variety of reddish browns and highlights. But this, to me, it felt good doing this starting the day. Last night I put in those blue spruce and they were fine, but they, I don't know, they kind of really stuck out against the other greens, so I just wanted to take the focus away from them a little bit. So as you can see, I put quite a bit of work into these trees. I was using my sponge again to put in even more texture, wildflowers, whatever it may be. And then the leaves. At first I was wondering if I could just have these branches bare, but it's very much a spring or summer forest, so I wanted everything to be green and in bloom, so I actually had a lot of fun painting all these leaves. I often tell my students that I'm not the kind of artist that sits and paints every leaf and every blade of grass, but the truth is I would like to be. And further in the background, not so much detail is necessary, but as you come forward into the foreground, you can't really avoid painting detail if you're want your painting to be somewhat believable. And this is where I had initially started painting what I thought was going to be a baby deer, but very quickly realized that it was looking very canine and very fox-like, so I decided to turn the deer into a fox, which worked out very, very well. Looked quite rough at first, but put a lot of work into it today, and it looks very foxy-loxy now. And I didn't give up on the deer. I went and painted in the deer a little bit further back instead of in the foreground. So with any creatures that have fur, there is a lot of layers that are needed. I really build up a lot of layers of reds and oranges and browns and tan colors and ochres and siennas, and you do need a lot of little individual brush strokes to make it look like fur. So this is something I worked on quite a bit today, and I'm still not quite done actually. But I was very eager to start painting some creatures, so started in on a hare in the background. And over here is where I'm going to paint the ogre and its garbage, or the king's garbage actually, that it is eating. This canvas isn't huge, so I was wanting to have more ogres and more animals, but I'm realizing that if I'm going to be able to paint as many creatures as I like for this, I'm going to actually have to get some bigger canvases, which was a bit of a surprise, but when I think about it, I do want to have a lot of creatures in this, because it's all about the animals of the forest. So the fox gradually started coming together, and I started having to work on the ground, forest floor, painting in a bunch of moss, and I had painted some flowers, greenery, dirt, rocks, and I'm about to add in some mushrooms shortly too. So whenever painting a forest, it's important to have a lot of different greens, so really tried to vary the green and then blend it as well. As you can see here, I'm starting with the blending, individual brush strokes to simulate grass. This is where I was painting some magic mushrooms by the bunny rabbit. The rabbit will get some more detail later. So I wanted to make sure that I got the deer right this time, so I went in with my chalk pencil and it did a quick outline drawing, which I sometimes do, just so I knew I was getting the proportions right, and then I quickly painted in a deer emerging in the background. So many layers are needed for fur, really to give it the fluffy, full, bushy texture. And if you look at red foxes, they are quite red, and they do have variation in the color of their fur. So put a lot of love and care into this fox today. So I fixed his little paw so it looks like he's moving forward, and then I started working on the ground a bit more. And now it's time to start painting the ogre. This is where it gets fun for me. I realized that actually maybe, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I might have more experience painting mythical creatures than I do actual wild animals. I love painting ogres and gnomes and fairies and unicorns and dragons and monsters and all sorts of creatures, sea creatures. It's something I do quite a lot, and I love bringing something from the imagination into reality. So I spent a lot of time building up the layers on this very chunky and happy ogre who will be holding a rotten apple in his hand, and he's kind of inspired by a Japanese ogre or demon, so he's wearing a Japanese what do you call them, like the sumos wear? I forget the name, but it's like something you wear around your middle anyways. So yeah, very rough at first, and this is how it always looks when I paint. Even when I'm going for realism, it's always quite rough, and then gradually start refining it, building it up. Acrylic paints need to be built up quite a bit with many layers, and then I gradually get more detailed. He brought me a lot of joy though, this particular ogre. He's quite fun. The design for this ogre I did actually plan in my sketchbook first. There's quite a few different ogres that I would like in the story. I want them to be all different. This one is a little bit smaller than I had intended, so I'm going to make sure to paint some bigger ones and some smaller ones too, all different sizes. For the book, and for people tuning in and for the first time who haven't watched the previous video, this painting is actually the first illustration for my upcoming children's book, The Animals and the Ogres. So I decided to document the process. This image is not necessarily going to be in the book. It's just my first attempt. Maybe it'll be the cover, but I think it's just kind of going to be my first promotional image, just to let people know that it's happening, because I do have every page planned out what I'm going to illustrate. And I am realizing I prefer to work larger, so I think I'm going to do these quite large, which is a bit daunting for me because I really have a lack of space, but I think in the book there's going to be about a dozen paintings, which will be, each painting will be a 2-page spread, so they actually should be fairly longish paintings. They don't necessarily have to be too big, but if they could be longer, so they can spread over 2 pages. Oh, I decided to go have a little peek in my storage/drag room. I got a little bit more organized yesterday. This is where I keep all my extra art, piles of fabric, and all my drag. Lots of art in here. Here's an old painting of mine. Yeah, so many paintings. So when you're painting with anything three-dimensional, when you're trying to represent three-dimensional space, you always have to work with highlights and shadows, and usually when I'm painting something, I'll start building it up in some kind of mid-tone first, and then I will go in and work on the highlights and shadows. And of course I'm building highlights and shadows the whole time as well, but it's a process because acrylics dry quite dull, so you have to keep building them up. So it is actually very time consuming. I spent a lot of hours today painting. I had at least 2 hours of footage, so I decided to speed it up quite a bit more today. I just really dove into the painting today, and I worked very quickly actually. That was about it for painting today. I started a little bit on the pile of the king's garbage, but didn't get too far with that. I decided to make some food. I was really craving tabbouleh today, so cooked up some bulgur and I chopped up a whole bunch of mint and parsley, and I made some very delicious tabbouleh. I made a lot of tabbouleh, which was kind of a late lunch, and now as I'm editing, I'm probably still going to make something for dinner, but I'm not sure what yet. I love tabbouleh because it's just such a great way to get lots of parsley and mint. And then just a bit of salt and pepper. I added a tiny bit of garlic, tomato, olive oil, and lots of lemon juice. Very tasty recipe that I got from a friend many years ago. I love tabbouleh. It's so refreshing, so good. And finally, out of nowhere, this very old footage of a painting, a large painting that I had done years ago, and I wasn't happy with it. so I ended up painting over it, unfortunately. Looking at it now, I feel like it still had a lot of potential, but oh well, I guess it'll have to live on in this video. Thanks again for watching.